This is the Fail Fast podcast. Stories of entrepreneurs who looked at failure in the eyes and didn't give up. With your host, the online sales master, Quinn Amorum.
Welcome back to the show, my friends. Today's guest has a master's degree in leadership development. She's been working for over 15 years in leadership development. She is certified coactive coaching, conversational intelligence, and is a frequent guest lecturer at universities. She is the person that leaders go to when they need tools so they can basically manage their own businesses with the tools given by her. It is Sarah Noll Wilson. Sarah, how's it going?
It's good.
So Sarah, listen, this is 15 years into leadership development. I mean, that's for a lot of things, it doesn't sound like much. For others, it is like crazy amount of time, because 15 years ago, we didn't have like what we have now, social media, and a lot of people talk about it. So you started this before it was cool, right?
Before leadership was sexy.
Yes. Right. So what made you 15 plus years ago pick leadership development?
Yeah, I fell into it. My undergraduate degree was in theater performance and theater education. And I was working at an insurance company, so I could do theater at night. And one of the things that I started to become really curious about was just the dynamic of the person who is in the position of authority and the impact that they had on the team, not just on the business, but on the team. And, and part of it was inspired by working with some people who weren't great leaders, but also part of it was inspired by working for people who were amazing and becoming really interested in that dynamic. And so that's just what opened it up for me, was to go, man, these people have not only the ability, the way I describe it is leaders not only have the ability to make or break businesses, but they can also make or break people. And I'm interested in that side of it. And so that's what got me started. And I just became insatiable. Like, I learned as much as I could. I made sure that I moved into a management role so I could get experience. I'm like, I can't help people if I don't know what it's like to be in their shoes. And that's what led me down the path of my master's and then leading the leadership development efforts and then starting my own company. So, but I will say real quickly, I'm talking about leadership in the formal role, but one of the things that has evolved for me is that that's just a role of authority. I don't believe that leadership is tied to a role. I think it's an act. I think it's not the title you have, it's what you do and it's how you show up. So that's where I've evolved.
Yes. Yeah, that's powerful. And so fascinating. You were into theater performance and theater education. So that's completely different than what you do
let's
today.
Be clear. When I interviewed for my first job in corporate America, in the interview, they asked me, do you think you could sit still in a cubicle? And I'm like, I don't know. We'll try.
Yes. So at least you could perform during that interview.
Clearly not well, because they were wondering if I could handle it. But yeah.
So one of the things you mentioned, a lot of people, and me included, have experienced it. And it's the difference between leadership or somebody in a position of power. And I guess that's the leader that sometimes nobody wants to follow. They're not a leader. I guess it's the difference between boss or a leader, right?
Well, and sorry to interrupt real quick, but both people have power. It's just how they use it. But to your point, it's the one that is not using it for the betterment of others. Yeah. Exactly.
For the betterment of themselves. And sometimes the business gets affected by it. And I saw that firsthand, really big business being destroyed, literally because of that. And I mean, the person most of the times doesn't know. Do you think they know if there's this, I don't know, somebody that has the power to break a person, break a business? Sometimes they don't know that they're bad at it or that they shouldn't be there. So how do you tell somebody like that?
Well, I'll answer that in a couple of ways. I actually really appreciate your question and your awareness, because are there people who are consciously and unapologetically just like, I don't care. This is what I'm about. This is who I am. Tough. Absolutely they are. But there's certainly the minority. But what I see is exactly what you're saying is most people who, aspire to and want to be in a formal leadership role want to do it because they want to do good. They have beautiful intentions. It's just their impact sucks, and so a lot of times we don't see the gap between what we intend to do and the actual impact we make. Right. It's kind of like, my joke is always, whenever I work with leaders, I like, one of the questions I ask, thousands and thousands of people now is, like, imagine your team members are having dinner and they're talking to their family member and your name comes up. What do you hope they say about what it's like working with you? And it's always aspirational and it's always positive and it's always inspirational. I'm like, never somebody is like, I hope they say that I make them like walk on eggshells around me because they never know what they're going to get. Or, I hope the impact I make is that they question themselves. Like, that never happens again. We know that happens. So that's like my first thing is, part of it is we view ourselves through our intentions, which is not the same as the actual impact we make. Like, that's first. And a fun side note, there was a study that was done and they asked people, it was by Dr. Tasha Urich, and they asked people, how self-aware do you think you are? And it was like 80 some, almost 90% said highly self-aware, right? When they actually evaluated how self-aware were they really, it was only 10%. So like most of us have gaps we aren't even aware of.
Well, it's funny what you mentioned that most of them, if not all, wanted to be liked, yeah. Although they not purposely, so they were probably doing things wrong. But the one in my case, he didn't want to be liked, and he would often say it. I'm not here for you to like me. I'm not here to be your friends. And so there was no conversation. I mean, if you're talking to your family or your friends, there was no situation where where there was positive things said about him.
Yeah,
right?
and he clearly didn't care.
Exactly.
That's hard.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's when you ask, like, how do you help somebody see that? When somebody doesn't care about their impact or that it's costing somebody something, one, I would argue they shouldn't be in a position of power and they shouldn't be a leader. But you can't always control that. But those people, it's kind of like you can't coach the unwilling, right?
Yes.
And so, like, if they're successful in their own way and their company's okay tolerating that, then that's theirs. But it usually will take some significant act for that to change. But for the people who are like good, helping them, helping them understand the impact. But part of the thing that gets in our way is just humans, is that it's really hard for us to look at and own our role in contributing to something. It's hard for us to see where we've done something that wasn't effective. It's hard for us to see where we get protective or we get defensive, or whatever or where we're making assumptions about people. And so that's really, really tricky.
So Sarah, over the last 15 plus years, while working with leaders and in your business, what was like one of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome?
Well, that's a loaded question. Like, for myself or with people, like a challenge with a leader or like challenge within myself?
With yourself or a leader, which one is like the most powerful one that you remember more vividly?
And I mean, what I will say is, because I know a lot of your listeners are entrepreneurs and, building their businesses, that I think in the beginning, the biggest challenge for me was owning the fact that I had something of like a value to offer, right? Like having confidence in what I knew and having confidence that that there could be a different way of leading. I think that it's interesting saying this out loud. I don't know that I've thought about it in this way, but I think one of the challenges that I've faced is really challenging that idea of what it means to lead, and that what does it mean to lead humans? Because our culture in corporate America is very much bottom line, finances, outcomes. And I wanted to challenge that. And how do we lead people in a way that is more human? How do we show up with empathy? How do we do that? And so that was like a fundamental challenge of the system that got a lot of, I got a lot of pushback, but also had moments of doubt of like, is that possible? Like, can we create leaders who actually deeply care about their team members? And what's possible when that happens? But I mean, early on, it was just like my own personal doubt. And once I started to become more confident with myself, then that obviously changed. But I've got lots of, stories of fun, challenging leaders, and I'm sure people have stories about me in the same way. The tables were turned.
Well, one of the hardest ones is the one you mentioned, is like the imposter syndrome, where you don't think of yourself like, do I really have something to offer?
Yeah.
And until we get rid of that, and I know a lot of people that suffer from the imposter syndrome that should never suffer from it, because they have an experience that could help so many people. But it's like, one is the fear of public speaking, or even sometimes one-to-one. Some people don't feel comfortable and they cannot express themselves at 100%. And then that fear of like, why me? That it consumes a lot of people. And I've been through it. And years ago, this was something that I was scared of, teaching people something. And there's one part of business that I know a lot, and I've been doing it, every single day for many, many, many hours and for so many years, that it's something that you just do. And I mean, how do you get rid of that? I mean, you did, but
I think I have a different relationship with it. I think I've quieted it. But you said something that's interesting. Because you shared like it was something I did for a lot of hours, and it was just like what I did. And I think one of the things that's interesting when we talk about this idea of imposter syndrome is, sometimes something that we are skilled in doesn't feel remarkable because it just feels normal. And it just feels like, well, but everybody knows this. Like, I think that's, that was part of it for me, was like, yeah, but everybody knows this. And like realizing, oh no, not everybody does know this. Not everyone is spending hours like you were on what you were building. And so you had something to offer. But I think that it's kind of that like, I don't know if it's not expert blindness. That's a different concept, but it is this idea of like, oh, but this is just like common sense. And so I think that's part of what can contribute to it, instead of realizing that like, oh no, not everybody knows what you know. Not everyone has learned what you've learned. And, I'll say for me, a couple of things that has helped me have a different relationship with it. And the reason I say that is because, so I call it a saboteur, right? Like it's not my term. That's a term that's used, right? That little inner critical voice that says you're not good enough, you're not smart enough. One of the ways that I like have a different relationship with it now is that it almost serves like a beacon, that if it starts to show up, I know I'm playing in the right area. But if I'm not like pushing hard enough, like if I'm not having a little voice of like, ooh, are you getting like outside your comfort zone too much? Then I'm like, oh, I need to push harder. So now it's like this little indicator of, okay, you're playing in the right space because you're uncomfortable. But it's like, instead of being paralyzed by it, having it push you, right? And some very specific things that I've done, in addition to having a really great therapist, which I'm very pro therapy, but like, and working with coaches, is just, naming it. I like give my voices names, like not yet Nancy. Not yet Nancy is a voice in my head that says you're not ready yet. I'm like, I see you, not yet Nancy. I see you. I'm good. I actually think I got this, And so that's actually work I've done with people, is to help them like name it so they can create some space and go, is that true or not? Yeah.
Funny, not yet Nancy. So maybe I got to start naming my voices as well.
What would yours be? If you like, I have a whole cast of characters. I have Better Betty. I have some that are not appropriate for work, and
I have many of them. Although I haven't thought about, because I had never thought about naming them. But there's one that shows up. It doesn't matter if I try to control it or not. It always shows up, and it's the one that gets. I haven't named it yet, so I got to think about it. But it's It's the one that wants to go in every direction at the same time.
Oh, that's my ADHD.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So you know what I'm talking about then.
Yeah, that's a diagnosable condition. But does that, what happens? So let me ask you, what happens when, I love that description of like, it wants to go everywhere at once. What happens when you realize you can't?
When I realize I can't, I mean, I've realized that a long time ago, but it still keeps happening. And what I do is I decide, okay, this is the important task that has to be done. So when I go to start that task, everything is fine. And then it looks like, I don't know, almost like a movie. You fast forward and I have 13 other tasks that I'm working on. And that first one is in the position where it was when the fast forward happened. And then I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Let's go back. And then I force myself to go back, and I will not stay in that task the full until it's complete. And I know I have to. It's just so hard, and it's almost like impossible to control it. Right?
Yeah. I mean, one, I admire your like ability to like hold structure and then like complete it. I jokingly said, but also seriously from an ADHD perspective, don't know if you've ever been diagnosed, but many entrepreneurs are either diagnosed or undiagnosed, right? That's part of what makes us great is we can think of all these ideas. We can like make all these connections. We can like see, here's 100 possibilities, and your team's like, slow down. You gave us 100 possibilities last week, Sarah. Like we could only do so much, we only have so many hours. And that, I think that's that tension between something that makes you great. I know it makes you great, but it can become a problem because we just can't chase 100 different shiny balls.
Yes. On my Google Chrome, I have the bookmarks and I have them now in folders because I know of my issue, although I was never diagnosed. I know of my problems. So I try to be super organized. So I know when that happens, I have a folder to save things in so I can look at them at another date. So I have like the ideas folder, the pages that I want to copy or take ideas from. And then when I realize, okay, you shouldn't be doing this right now, I save it into those folders and I leave it there. And then most of the times, I don't go back to those folders because then something else comes up. Yeah. But I have them all saved there, and I have the hopes that one day I'll be so focused, and there's going to be some sort of limitless pill that's going to get me so focused that I'll be able to do everything that I have to do, and then I'll go through those folders and do all of that as well.
I'm laughing because I'm laughing because what was coming up for me is I can't tell you how many times I've told the team, like, it's going to be a quiet month. We'll be able to tackle all of this. And your team member, Kristen's like, that doesn't happen. But one of the things I love about, what you just shared is, sometimes there's all this advice out there, whether it's about being a leader, whether it's about building a business, whether it's about like how to prioritize your time management. And the reality is that we're all of our brains are unique. And again, if you have any sort of additional cognitive challenges, right, whether that's like struggling with mental health or right, like more neurodivergent from being on the spectrum or ADHD perspective, is one of the things that's been a huge lesson for me is realizing that I need to write my own manual for what works for me and to be unapologetic about that. And to be okay that I know you all wake up at 4 a.m. That's just not going to work for me. Right. And so I love how you figured out a system to at least take those moments of inspiration. Right. My husband got me a t-shirt once that he custom designed it and it says prone to inspiration. So you and I are we're in company together. But you created a system to be able to I'm going to capture that. I may or may not do something with it, but that's not as important as me getting it out of my head so I can then focus on what's next. And I love that because that's your manual.
And you touched on one of the things that we see a lot of the motivational or inspirational people talk about the times started changing. I noticed it was first like, oh, I get up 6 o'clock in the morning, then 5, 4, 3. Now there's people that say, oh, I get up at 2:30 in the morning
I
and
sleep 2 hours a night.
I go hit the gym. And if you're not doing that, you are missing out. And I'm like, when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I've only had 1 hour sleep by then.
Yeah, right.
Because I work till 2 because of, some time differences. I have to work with my team and suppliers. And when it comes to physical products and stuff, you have to deal with suppliers overseas. So, I mean, when they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I've been sleeping for 1 hour.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that if you don't wake up at 3 o'clock, you're not doing enough. I mean, I could work 14 hours a day.
Or won't be as successful,
Exactly. The time of when you start doesn't matter. It's how long you do it for and how well you do whatever activity for, right? So I'm glad we're on the same page on that one too.
Because I think what happens is that when people subscribe to one belief, they can feel a ton of shame because they're like, but I can't figure that out. Instead of going, well, that's okay that works for them, but that's not going to work for me. And the other thing is, because I'm passionate about from a mental health perspective, a lot of the typical suggestions for time management work if you're a neurotypical person. And what I mean by neurotypical, again, you don't have people who have struggled with ADHD or other, challenges. It's not a choice. It's literally the fact that my prefrontal cortex doesn't work in the same way as yours. So I have to navigate that differently. And so I think sometimes what I see, I saw it in myself, but I see it in other people, is when they subscribe to, there's one way to success, one way to build a business, one way to be whatever they want to be. There's a lot of shame, which then, going back to the imposter syndrome, can then feed that imposter syndrome, because you're like, well, shoot, why can't I figure it out? What's wrong with me? Instead of what's wrong with me, it's oh, well, I actually work late because that's when I'm most creative and that's where my clients are. So that means I'm going to start my day at 9 or 10, and that's okay.
And that's so fascinating that you would say that. And I think I mispronounced fascinating. But because thinking about it, some of the people that now we follow and we like in social media, that's their life. The social media is their life. So when I follow, let's say, Dwayne Johnson, and he says, I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I hit the gym, and then I do this and I do that. I'm like, okay, yes, it does work for him. Because one of his jobs is hitting the gym and taking pictures of himself.
He has to have muscles to be successful.
Yeah. And for example, another person that I follow, and he's very powerful in all ways, physically and the way he speaks, and is David Goggins. I don't know if you heard of him.
Oh, yeah.
And David Goggins, what he does is he runs. So he can run day and night. If it's raining, thunderstorm, tornadoes, he's out running. And he has somebody recording him while he's running. And I mean, he was considered the most powerful man the strongest man or whatever. But of course, in my business, I can't wake up when he wakes up and go run the streets. For one, I can't physically do it.
I don't know that I wanna, but I appreciate he does it.
But even if I could, that wouldn't help my business.
Yeah.
That's not, because my business is not running and feeding my 3 million fans on Instagram. So
I mean, again, you bring up, I love this conversation so much, and I'm so glad we went here. We didn't know where we were going to go, but I'm I'm so glad we went here. Because again, going back to the imposter syndrome, these are I'm making some connections right now because of our conversation. It's it's so much driven by shame. And this shoulds, oh, I should do this or I should do that, instead of going, one of the things that, as my business has grown and trying to figure out well, how do we be more strategic with marketing? How do we, be smarter about our social media, right? All of that stuff. And, and so people give me tips. They're well, you just need to do videos every day. I'm I'm working with clients 8-10 hours a day, because that's my business, and so I've realized that I have to be okay with, well, if somebody's sole focus is I want to build an online community, that's my goal, well, fantastic, then that makes sense. But if I'm, doing work with leadership teams, helping them deal with like the really tough stuff, and it's not negating the importance of social media, that's not what I'm saying, but it is this willingness to say, what is my business and what are the things that are going to serve it? And also like, who am I and what's going to serve me? And like, maybe I don't want to scale to be a multi-million-dollar company. Maybe I want this to be big enough for me to be in a small team to be really comfortable. And like, that doesn't make you a failure. It's really powerful when we can get clear about like, who are we? What's the work we want to do? Who do we serve? And then what do we need to build around that? Not that I figured that out, but that's certainly something I think about a lot.
Yeah. And you know what? It's so rare to find somebody that has everything so decided of what they want and what they don't want, that you rarely find somebody that builds a successful business, multi-million-dollar business. And I know one person that, because they have been here on the podcast, and when that business got to multi-millions, they had just, the business was so big, they had millions in salaries, talking about 200 plus employees. And he's like, this is not what I want. He didn't want that. So he got this cabin in the mountains and he moved out there because he didn't want the busy multi-million-dollar lifestyle. That's not what he wanted. But his business became so successful that happened. So he removed himself from it. And that is somebody that has it figured out. I don't want this, or I want this, because a lot of people, when something happens, they're like, okay, this happened. Now I'm going to live with it. And this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I'm going to tolerate it. I mean, I will tell you, because I mean, a lot of the work that I do is, again, working with like senior leaders and executive teams. And I can't tell you how many people I've worked with who have hit that executive level. And they didn't hire me for this, but it comes up and they go like, I'm at the peak, like, and I'm not happy. And like, is that normal? Right? It's kind of this like permission to question, this permission, because again, this, what success means, especially coming from America, like success is, right, like you're making the top 10, whatever list, you're making X millions of dollars. It's, and to really get, again, unapologetic about clarifying, well, what does success look like for you? And I love, you'll have to give me the name because I'd love to listen to that interview that you did, because I think that's an act of courage. I would argue that's an act of leadership to say, that's not what I want. I want this. That's what leadership looks like.
Yeah, for sure. So there's one thing that I suspect what it is, but I'm not 100% sure. So I want to ask you, what does it mean to be chronically curious?
It's so to be chronically curious is to always know there's something you don't know. It's to always know that sorry, I have to laugh. A bird just hit my window. For people listening, previously, before we started recording, a bird hit my window. We joked that, what if that happens? And it happened. I hope the little guy's okay. But so curiosity, right, is just that willingness to like own and know that there are things you won't know. And there will always be things, and to constantly be searching for. One of the reasons curiosity is such an important value of mine and such an important part of our practice, our work. So we've built what we call the curiosity first approach, which is how do we really explore, how do we experiment, and then how do we evolve from that information we've gathered. And part of it is because of like my years, the thing that I realized was causing so much stress in relationships. The thing that like the traps people would fall into with relationships is they would make assumptions. They would hold on to their lenses. They wouldn't own their role, right? The things that would be traps for leaders leading change is they would jump to quick solutions. They would, right? Like, it all came down to this like need to either be right or this need to have it be simple. But when we can take a step back and get curious and go, there are just things I don't know. And that's not passive, right? To be chronically curious isn't passive. It's actually quite active to say, well, what questions can I ask? What questions can I ask myself? How do I get curious with myself? How do I get curious with you? How do I get curious about the situation so that I can see more possibilities? So that's what it means to be chronically curious.
Okay, you know what? That ties into one of my favorite sentences in business, not in the whole life, but in business, my favorite sentence is, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand how powerful this is.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that if you do not ask questions and if you don't look outside of what you already know, I mean, nothing wrong will ever happen because you don't. This is very powerful that you don't.
Yeah. So what is it about that? I mean, like, I can hear your passion, and like, if you don't, for you personally, like, what is it about that idea of like, you don't know what you don't know? Why do you think that's so important for leaders and business owners?
Well, in my particular case, let's come up with a real example. Let's say I'm launching a physical product that's going to be selling in, let's say, 34 countries in the world. And I can't just, because let's say I invented a fidget spinner, right? Mm-hmm. I can't just invent that fidget spinner and launch it because of I don't know what I don't know. So is it legal in all countries to launch a fidget spinner? And saying this, a lot of people may think like, of course it is. And it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Now, when you launch that fidget spinner, then again, are you allowed to call it a fidget spinner? Sure. Then does somebody own the name? Does somebody have a patent of something similar? Now, is that name a bad word in one of the countries that you plan on selling on? Right. So that's the things that I don't know. And just thinking about it real quickly, okay, that's not a big deal, but some of them could be big deals. And it has happened, Sarah. Mm-hmm. Simple things, or things that you think are very simple, like, okay, I'm going to go import some bamboo from China and make some kitchen trays or whatever made of bamboo. And I mean, you don't know at first that you cannot just buy bamboo and import it. It has to go through a fumigation system to make sure that there's no viruses that cannot be brought to the US or to Canada. I mean, if that's kind of stuff that you don't know it at first, but it will come back to bite you.
Yeah.
Because, right, there's another one that is, ignorance of the law is not an excuse, or something like that.
Yeah.
They tie in together. Just because you didn't know that existed doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
I think that like that asking of questions, right? And we know that from research, right? Like all the top books on innovations are like one of the most important practices, asking questions. And this is where going back to like, you're like, you seeing lots of possibilities, like, that's what serves you in being able to like see those, like, oh, I got to ask questions about that, right? Like, again, that's like part of your superpower, is being able to see that. The same is true in the work that I do, which is with relationships, and when people are navigating conflict, and when we're, navigating or helping leaders navigate change, right? It's, whenever there's an elephant in the room, right? You can see it, because I was just doing a workshop yesterday on it. But it's like, we're so quick to make assumptions, and we're so quick to judge people. We're so quick to blame people. And we don't ask enough questions of, what is it really about the situation that's triggering me? What is it really that I need? Because it's not about you. It's about me and a need I have that's not being met. What assumptions am I making? And then to like ask questions about the other person, and like, what are they feeling? What makes sense to them? And people are always like, what do you mean what makes sense to them? I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't get it. And I was like, but let's set aside the judgment, because it does make sense to them. And if we can ask those questions, just like when you're talking about product, it's the same thing with people. Like, if we just ask enough questions and are open to the possibility that, one, we might be wrong, but more importantly, two, we will discover something new, that's going to lead to a much better result, whether that's a product or whether that's a relationship and the conversation we need to have. People don't ask enough questions, and they certainly don't challenge, my experience, I should say, and this is true for me. We don't ask ourselves enough questions,
Wow, Sarah, I mean,
we could go on forever.
It's so fascinating. I interviewed the guy that was for 20 years the head of the FBI's Department of Study of Human Behavior. And
interesting.
And I mean, if somebody knows something about people, is the guy that's in charge of the FBI, that they probably know things that we don't even know exist.
Right.
And they study human behavior. And one of the things that we talked about is, for example, judging others.
Mm.
And he said it's very near impossible to stop yourself from judging others. But if you are curious and you ask enough questions, you can actually then change the way you view that person. And like you said, it's being curious.
Yeah.
So being curious and asking questions will get you the truth, right? Because what you see immediately on somebody or something is only your truth, is not the real truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you ask those questions, the truth will come out.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to stop the judging people and to actually understand everything, not just people, but our assumptions are sometimes, or most of the times, are our enemies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we assume things that are incorrect, or it's our perception of things. So,
and they may have served us at some point. That's why they're there, right? Or we observe them serving someone. Or even if, when I say serving us, it may just be psychological, say, like protection. That might be it. But they have served us at some point, and it's like being willing to test it. And like, again, that's an act of courage to say, I don't think you're somebody who I will get along with, or whatever. Yeah. Or I think, and then like, well, let me test that, and I think, and, I love the story you bring up about the FBI agent is we have a lot of defaults that happen so quickly with our brain. And but when we understand it, then we can see it. And when we see it, then we can show up differently with it. But we can't always, just like we can't always stop the defensive reaction. It's just going to happen, right? Like, but I can see it and I can navigate out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So now one of the things I want to know is, because you work with leaders, and not only work with leaders, you teach leaders and you coach them, looking at the very known leaders out there, is there somebody that you follow, like the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, Simon Sinek, or
can you name a couple women in there? Notice how those were all men?
Yes, but I can
okay,
because,
give me some, and the reason I'm not poking you, but some of it is like our default of leadership is male, because that's what we're used to.
That is true. Although there are two that I personally like. One because of what she believes in is Oprah Winfrey, and of course they are very big names, but Michelle Obama as well. And just because, and it's not to do with politics, because I know nothing about politics. Completely honest,
that protects
Sarah,
you right now.
I don't even know if Michelle Obama. I know she was married to
President Obama.
President Obama, yeah. I knew his last name. I can't remember his first.
Barack, yeah.
Oh, but there you go. See, that's how much I know.
Oh, but that's, but like
I don't know.
And it's like, well, you should know our president, but I won't know. Like I might not. I mean, that's no.
Yeah, Canada doesn't even have a president, so.
Right.
But I just think that because of what I've seen, that she is a very powerful person and very easygoing. So, but it is true. Most of the very well-known leaders out there are male, and like what I said, like Elon Musk, Bezos, and then some others that are super powerful that a lot of people love them, others hate them, like Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Nobody knows now what's true or not about him, the things that keep coming out. So who are your favorites?
I mean, there's a couple, right? I mean, I'm thinking like names, like who are the names that people would know, I guess. One person, and it will be a male to start with for different reasons, is Dan Price with is it Gravity Payments? He was the CEO who cut back his wages so that everyone could have a living wage as his company. Right?
I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so following his journey, I think what I like about him and what I enjoy watching his journey as a leader is, again, he's challenging the status quo of what does it mean to build a business. And, and even when they had significant decreases in revenue, right? When COVID started, instead of laying people off, which is what most companies would do, they started having conversations as a company about how are we going to handle this? And again, you're only hearing one side of it. So I only can take in the story that is shared, because again, to be curious, there's always things we don't know. But but collectively, the company decided to do sort of their own furlough program so that nobody would lose their job. And the people who were more financially stable took more time off so that the people who didn't have that kind of stability. So that's one of the things that I like. He's somebody who I enjoy following from the standpoint of like leading a company, because he's really challenging the status quo. Or at least that's like, I mean, he took the fact that he's minimum wage or minimum pay is 70,000 is unheard of, right? And then, there's some others, obviously, like from a thought leader perspective, I think Brene Brown is incredible, but part of it is not just like, who she is. It's the fact that she tackles this really tough topic of shame and has been able to do it in a way where people have accepted it, and not just like women, but men as well have, so there's that. There's a leader, her name's Liz Wiseman. Might not be as well known, but she runs the Wiseman Group, and she wrote the book Multiplier, which is just a fantastic book. But I've had the chance to see her speak. I don't know as much about her personally, but I really admire the type of work she does, how she communicates it, but also how she's building her business, because, she wants to keep her practice smaller, but she wants to scale it. So she's made some really like powerful partnerships with Franklin Covey to get the content out more. And so that's like, again, like when I look at female business owners that I would aspire to be like, she's definitely somebody on that list.
And now, Sarah, I know you are working on a book.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Or is it still a secret?
No, it's not. It's not. It won't be probably by the time. No, it's not. So the book is called Don't Feed the Elephants. How do we overcome the art of avoidance? That's my nice way of saying we avoid the tough stuff, the art of avoidance to build powerful partnerships. And really what the book encompasses is just for the last 10 years, I really have been on this personal journey of how the heck do you create cultures where we actually can deal with the elephant in the room, and how do we, and when I say deal with, some of the perspectives that I'm trying to challenge people is it's not about calling the elephant out. That's very like assertive and aggressive. And a lot of times when we think about the elephant in the room, again, going back to judgment, it's like you're the elephant in the room. The leader's the elephant in the room. It's very blaming instead of recognizing that, no, the elephant in the room is there because I see a problem and I've not done anything about it. The moment I become aware that there's a harmful barrier and I don't address it, I've actually created the elephant. So that's like one of the things I want to challenge people to redefine that definition. That the elephant in the room isn't a person. They might be doing behaviors that are not productive, right? But it's the moment we avoid is actually when we're feeding the peanuts. So that's why the title of the book is Don't Feed the Elephants. Like, stop feeding them, right? That's how we're gonna.
Wow. So see if I understand correctly. When there's an elephant in the room, you may be the only one that sees it.
Yeah.
Is that's the case? Because you created it.
And it's created because there's a harmful barrier that's getting in the way, right? Like that's the definition, right? It's a harmful barrier that's getting in the way of success that we're not addressing. Everyone might see it, which means we've all just been throwing at peanuts. I like to the visual of that of just oh, we all know that this process isn't going to work, but I'm not going to say it. Here you go. Let me chuck a peanut and that, elephant's going to grow. And part of that shift is because, again, in working with people in these moments when there's clear elephants in the room, as long as we're coming from a place of blaming, we can't move to a place of getting curious, exploring, resolving, creating something different. And so the first place we have to start with is ourselves. Is, man, what is it about this situation? What role did I play? Is this a performance issue? Is it a preference issue? What's really going on? And then again, how do we get curious about them? Because sometimes we don't even need to have a conversation to free an elephant. We can just, by asking ourselves questions and going, oh, now that I think about it, that's not what Quinn meant. And then poof, it's gone.
So Don't Feed the Elephant. And that's the name of the book. And when do you expect it to come out?
End of January.
January 2021.
2021, end of January. Yeah.
All right. So when it does, send me a reminder so I can remind everybody that's listening, that's interested, okay, the book is out. Go get it before it runs out.
We'll hope. Here's the thing. I see so much, there's so much unnecessary suffering and stress because we don't know how to show up with the uncomfortable moments. So we avoid it, and then we become resentful, and then we tolerate, and then we do all this stuff that make me feels safer in the short term, but in the long term causes so much more damage. So I want people to be armed with, like, how do we actually show up in a way that's compassionate, candid, and curious?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When you're resentful, it will build up. And if it ever gets to a point where it explodes, then there's going to be a lot of more consequences than just that. And sometimes it's a misunderstanding that causes that resent. But
if we can have the conversation and I can understand that it's a misunderstanding, then we can actually heal and move forward.
It's a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
So Sarah, tell us, where can people know more about you? Where can they find you? Your Instagram, LinkedIn, where do you want people to go?
Yeah, I think that, our website is www.sarahnollwilson.com, and that's Sarah with an H, Nollwilson. Otherwise, you absolutely can find me on all the social media channels. Although I will say that I play most in Twitter and LinkedIn. So definitely connect with me there.
There you go. So I'll have those on the show notes.
Awesome.
And Sarah, thank you so much. It was a huge pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
And well, as soon as the book comes out, like I said, remind me, and we'll either have you here again, or I'll send the reminder to everybody.
No, I appreciate that. I'd love to talk more about that. I'll give you a copy. I can.
Perfect.
Books are cheap once you print them, actually.
Send me the ebook one. Thank you, Sarah.
No, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you do. And I really just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
Thanks for subscribing to Fail Fast Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review and visit failfastpodcast.com for show notes, Quinn's social media, or even to tell us your story.